Out of Shasta College. This is our first day of this class in September. September 3rd already. Hope you all doing well. It's not as hot. It's not as smoky, so that's always good. It is Friday when I'm recording this. I'll push this up. Watch it at your own leisure, as they say. I hope you all saw that I signed a new essay number 2, Why Shakespeare Matters. I want you to watch the documentary on Canvas where I posted it. Take notes. It's only an hour long. And base your analysis, your critical analysis on the documentary. Because I want to see how you guys are interpreting this material. Yes, I know you could go to Wikipedia or some other research site and research and come up with a bunch of facts and figures that you didn't come up with. Someone else did, and you copy and pasted. I can usually tell that, and you won't do good if you do that. I want you guys to look at that documentary and try to come up with your own thoughts and analysis, critical analysis on why Shakespeare matters. Mattered, but still matters. There's no right or wrong in this. But I want you to watch the whole movie. I can usually tell when people don't complete a movie because there's a lot of missing elements. So that's what I'm looking for in those essays. Make sure they're at least 3 pages long. A lot of the first essays, a lot of people are handing in short essays. You'll keep losing points if you do. Writing to a certain amount of page count is part of the discipline of these essays. 3 to 5 pages. Some of you went to 4 or 5 already pages. That's great. They've written thousands of pages about Shakespeare. Surely you could come up with 3. I know it's a push. How do you come up with 3? Well, when you hit a dead end, look for something else in the story. Not just regurgitating facts and figures about his birth or his death or what plays he wrote. We're trying to figure out, who is this person, Shakespeare, William Shakespeare? Why does he matter? How did he exist over 500 years ago? And why are we still doing his plays today and still talking about his plays today and still finding new things that he had to say about the human condition? And it looked a lot different than it does today. No social media, no electricity, folks. They had to go to a very primitive theater and watch people, actors, perform these plays. And in England at the time, for reasons only in England, because this wasn't happening in Europe, all the male and female characters were played by men. It wasn't until later that they allowed women to play female characters. Maybe you saw the movie Shakespeare in Love. That's what that's about. Gwyneth Paltrow came out, I think, in the late 90s, possibly early 2000s. Anyway, that's what that's about. So, when you're reading Shakespeare, Hamlet, or Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, Ophelia, was played by a male. And then finally, women got the right to be on stage again in England. But that's what your paper's about. Put some thought into it. Don't just watch the film. I know it's due in a week. I signed it yesterday. It's due next Thursday. Please don't just start watching the film on Thursday and try to cram in your words in one day. You've got a whole week to watch the movie and to give it some thought. Take some notes. Yes, I read these papers. If you do good, that's all I say. Well done. If you need some help, you'll see it in the comments. Each essay, I'll get more demanding than what I'm looking for. This is only our second one. And so it's crucial because there's only 6 of these essays. There might be 7. We never know. Um, and I expect you guys to do the work. And I need to see the work being done in the essays, some thought process going on, critical thought, which is really key to understanding these historic characters. First, it was Martin Luther. I'm not done with your papers. There's a lot of you. I've got no excuse. I've got 4 other classes. Every class has got 50 people in it, so it's a lot of papers to grade. I'm going as fast as I can without getting burnt out. I'll have your first papers done by the time your second ones are out. Let's put it that way. Hopefully this weekend I'll have them done, so you can see if you're making crucial errors. But also, if you watch my lecture and if you look at the assignments, you should be able to see where I'm coming from and what I'm looking for in these essays. Who doesn't have the book yet? The textbook. We're into our 3rd week of school. Should have the book by now. Today I'm going to start on chapter 20, the Catholic Reformation and the Baroque Style. Baroque is a term actually originated in Italy. I don't know the exact um, Italian for it, but we use the French interpretation, Baroque, and essentially simply translates to irregular shape. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means a lot. It means irregular shape in the form of architecture, art, painting, writing, music. And if you think about that, that means there's a radical shift happening on the cultural landscape. For example, in music, this is the era that is dominated by early piano, which was called a harpsichord. Different than the piano. Piano's not around yet. You've heard a harpsichord. I know you have. They used to play it in a lot of old scary movies to give you a sense of something sinister is afoot. And Baroque music is very much associated with harpsichord because that's what it was composed on. And so there's a distinct sound to this style of music, as there is a distinct look to the architecture of the buildings that people are living in and designing for themselves. When when a culture is in flourishing, their architecture shows that. When it's not flourishing so much, it's pretty boring and dull and pedestrian architecture. Think about that as we go through the class. What do you think about the architecture around you right now? Does anything impress you, or does it look just utilitarian? You know where I'm going with that one. There's very few artistic buildings here in the North State or in any newer towns. They just are redesigning the entire downtown here in Reading, and it looks better than it did. I wouldn't call it Baroque, that's for sure. I'd call it pretty conservative. Baroque, in a way, meant flamboyant, overblown, larger than life, maybe. Some could say grotesque. That's okay. Overwrought. That's fine. Flamboyant. Yeah, it pops out. You know it when you see it, not just in the architecture, but you know when you hear it in the music. You know when you see it in the paintings. When Michelangelo's paintings, religious paintings, which are like big scenes from epic movies before hundreds of years before cinema was invented, or when Leonardo da Vinci is doing his Last Supper, which you can see the samples. If you guys ever get the dreaded textbook, and then there was a painter, Caravaggio, who really represents this era in the Baroque style of painting. We'll probably go deeply into painting starting next week. But today we're starting with these imagery, and they're usually religious imagery because that was in the culture of the day, the time. That's how you got commissions, painters. They just weren't painting on their own. They were usually paid by a patron. And so a lot of biblical Christian imagery was what paid the way, paid their way. And that's what you see. So there's a lots of different versions of scenes from the Bible interpreted by these painters. Same with musicians, same with the buildings. That's why a lot of people who, if you ever travel to an old city, say in Europe, you'll go into a building. It's not a church, but there is a church like feeling to it because there is this sort of overblown architecture that is there to make you feel the power of the human condition. And it can be overwhelming sometimes. Maybe you've been to New York City. Have you? You'll see the power of architecture there. Makes you feel small. Even if you go to San Francisco, hope you do that at least. You can feel the kind of awe and wonderment of what man can do with the environment we live in. Flamboyant, dramatic, overblown, all of it. Overwrought is another great term. So religion plays a huge, huge key to this era because there's a reformation going on the Catholic Church versus the Protestant Church. Read about it in your chapter. I'll post a couple documentaries, short ones, addressing those issues. Put them up on Canvas this weekend, and you'll be able to witness what I'm talking about through the great form of documentary. But if you had your book, you can follow along because what I've explained already, what I'm covering is this book. And if I could find, and it's not that easy sometimes to find films, documentaries that go along with it, that's the best we could do in this virtual class we're living in. Okay, there's a good example of the Brogue style of painting. Yes, that's a crucifixion. Doesn't look like Christ, though, does it? So there's a brutality to this style of painting because there's brutality in Christianity, folks. They were crucifying people. But if you look at this, and I know it's not easy to see it, I'm going to print some examples and in is look at the lighting. There's no lighting, folks, like that. There's no electricity. That's done with paint. So the painter is painting light and dark and shadows to create a dramatic, overblown, overwrought imagery known as Baroque style. It's very dramatic. It's very, I would call it cinematic. I'm a filmmaker, so I look at things cinematically, which is a fancy term for movies. These are early movies in a way. They're telling a story just like a film does. It's a narrative. They're not just posing for pictures. They're not just posing for portraits. There's a lot of action in that painting. This is the crucifixion of St. Peter. There is a ton of action going on here. Body movement. St. Peter looks like he's resigned to his fate. He's in shock for sure. He's in good shape too. He's got six-pack abs. They didn't have a gym in those days. Well, people's diets were different in those days than they are now. No fast food. And it looks like it's a burden. There's a lot going on in that photo, painting of a photo, the photo of a painting, I should say. A lot of action. There's movement. Yes, you can have movement in painting. That's what he was known for. Like I say, I'll post a couple brief documentaries on some of these people so you can get a sense of who they are, just like I did for Martin Luther and for the Shakespeare stuff. And I'm going to post a little documentary in the Catholic Ref. Everything was boiling up. Now we just don't have Holy Roman Empire, Holy Roman Church, Catholic Church controlling everything. Remember that Martin Luther? Now we're having offshoots. Protestants. It's not Catholics. It's different. We're having offshoots. We're having different opinion, different interpretations of the Bible, of what Christianity is, and it's affecting everybody in the culture at the time. These are very religious times, superstitious times. Shakespeare is writing a lot about ghosts and witches, things that people still believed in. Remember, these artists are holding up a mirror to the culture they're living in. They're not creating a new culture. They're simply commenting on the culture. They weren't farmers. They weren't milking cows. Maybe they did that also. They were driven to write a piece of music or a painting with the insatiable need to comment on the times they're living in. And that's how important these artists were. And you've heard of some of them. Maybe you've heard of Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, the painters, the writers, Shakespeare, Marlowe. It was exciting times. And we're talking about in a world where there was no mass social media. This was all word of mouth. You had to go to places, cities usually, to see these things. Then you need to go back to your homes and the farmlands, different countries, wherever it was they had populations, and they would tell the stories. And they'd bring the stories back of what they saw at the Old Globe Theater, or what they saw of a painting in the Sistine Chapel, for example, in Florence. You had to travel, you had to pay a price. It just wasn't clicking on something to see it on YouTube. I think we've lost a lot of the wow factor because of that. If you ever get a chance to travel to Europe, please do. They're starting to keep us out now because we have such a COVID spike here, but they're going to let us back in eventually. We get a control on this thing, hopefully one day. And go to a city, Rome, Florence, Amsterdam, Paris, Madrid, Barcelona, somewhere. Look at the architecture of Barcelona. It's a great example of flamboyant, grotesque, and that's not a bad word. My favorite writer, Flannery O'Connor, always called her characters grotesque. We'll talk about that when we get to literature. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It could be a creative thing, artistic. Once again, holding up a mirror to who we are. Perhaps you'll think the flight out of Afghanistan was grotesque. There's a lot of bad imagery. People died, children died, people clinging to the plane. That's pretty grotesque, pretty savage. But it's the truth. The truth is not always a beautiful thing. So, what you're doing this weekend, read the chapter 20 so you know what I'm talking about. It helps to put it in context. I'll put up some videos. You know what I want from essay number 2. I think you know what I want from your journals. We'll keep talking about it. Keep asking me questions. You know how to contact me. Hope you enjoy the weekend. It's the 3-day weekend. It's Labor Day weekend, which signifies the end of summer. Hopefully these fires will go away for a couple months and have done with us for a while. Until that day, enjoy what you're doing. Watch a good film. Read a good book. Be creative. Be kind to each other. And keep moving forward. Talk to you next week. And the story of our humanities continues. And now what? Guess what? You're all part of it.